Now that we're into configuring Liferay DXP settings, there are several options that you definitely want to configure in the running system. For one, there's a document and media repository. Why? Because we are not storing everything in the database, at least not by default, but we're also storing in a file system by default. If you look at the document and media repository in Liferay, then you will find that we'll definitely store metadata in the database. What's that? If you upload a file, an image, a PDF file, a Word file, and so on, then the metadata, the file name, tags, categories, anything that you add as a description to the file, even some metadata from the file itself. Word, PDF stores an author name. That gets stored in the database as metadata. And then the binary data, the actual binary blob, they get stored in a so-called document store. And by default, that's the file system, unless you configure something else. And by default, that's the so-called simple file system store, which is a simple directory somewhere in the file system, and typically within Liferay's home directory. And there in the data folder, there is one directory which will get all of the documents. Now, I don't particularly like that default, because if you upload thousands of documents, it will overwhelm some file systems. Actually, most of the file systems in today's computers, still most of them. What you typically want to have if you have a significant number of files is you'd rather want to configure the advanced file system store, which has the same storage mechanism in a file system, but it adds several subdirectories to it. Think of it like the Unix mail spool, which also deals with hundreds of thousands of files, but they're separated into multiple directories, and every directory has a limited number of files. So that's what the advanced file system store does, but in general it just stores everything within a directory. And that's the binary data. So the database contains the metadata, what's the file name, what's the ID, and so on, and then the store contains the actual data of the files that you upload. There's another option, there's the so-called DB store, and it does what you think it does. It actually stores the binary data in a database, in a relational database. That's great and bad. Now, if it's great or if it's bad, it depends on your own policies. There are database administrators that just are uncomfortable with you storing binary data blobs in their precious relational database. And there's others who say, meh, unless it's less than a couple of terabytes, who cares? Now, is it good or is it bad? Well, if you store your binary data in the database, it's trivial to have a transaction log backup. That is a backup in one particular very consistent state. Because, well, if we store the metadata in the database, the binary data in the file system, and then we'll take a backup, we'll need to take a backup of both. If we store both within the database, well, just go with a transaction log and it will just work, for the price of you polluting your relational database with binary data. If you have just a little bit, that's fine. If you upload huge videos to it, that's not quite what a relational database is built for. So your mileage may vary, depends on the actual data that you store, what you want to have. Also, another question would be access speed. If you have large data, then you might not want to keep your database connection open for downloading 100 megabyte, a gigabyte of video files. That on a database can pose a denial of service attack. If you have a couple of downloads of a large file and they all are streamed from the database, it might not be what you expect. So think of the nature of your files and then think of the nature of your backups that you want to have and determine, do I want DB store or don't I want DB store? And then, of course, hold on, yep.
can we change this during the runtime?
Can we change this during the runtime? We have...
From simple to advanced, maybe?
From simple to advanced, yes, indeed. We have one exercise where we actually do that. That is, once we go to clustering, then we will change to use the advanced file system store, and I wanted to cover it then, but I can cover it right now. The storage location is different. Naturally, advanced file system store has subdirectories, and the simple file system store doesn't have them. So you want to migrate from one to the other, and then you can change the implementation. But there is a mechanic in there, there is a tool in there that helps you to migrate from one to the other. And once you've done that, you can tell Liferay, well, use the other now, and then you can use the other. So yes, you can, but you need to physically migrate the data. As long as it's not within the other store, there's no point of pointing there. And if you run in the cloud, then you typically want to have the S3 store, because then you don't need you don't need any file system extra, but S3 is typically cloud native, and well, doesn't everyone support the S3 API right now? So we'll store all of the actual binary data in an S3 compatible store. That's just, those are just a couple of these options. There's also options for Documentum or Alfresco, which is the CMIS, right? So the CMIS store is there as well. For any CMIS compatible backend, we can store the binary data there. Be aware, this stores the binary data in there, the metadata, all of the file names and the actual data is still stored within Liferay's database. And by the way, being stored in is one of the aspects. Another one is Liferay will take a full text index. So it will also store, I'll say that in air quotes, data within Elasticsearch for later retrieval, so that you can search for full text content of your documents. Additional document features is we have some metadata sets, document types, we have Liferay sync. Well, let me first go to metadata set and document types. This is something that describes the metadata that we store. And again, this is a feature of the document library that I consider to be content side. This is not quite what any system administrator or DevOps personnel will take care of. This is something that happens on the content side when the content administrators configure what kind of metadata they want to retrieve for their documents. Liferay Sync, on the other hand, you can think of it as a kind of a Dropbox client. So it is a little tiny desktop application that will connect to a document store and synchronize it locally to your file system, as well as upload any of the changes that you make within your system, again, back to the server. New feature in DXP 7.2, you can actually link or embed Google Docs inside of Liferay with all the features that you are used to from Google Docs, and they will be indexed automatically. And we'll have a full API for this, and you can also integrate external applications for document conversion, previews, and audio-video feedback. A little bit of that we will see during the configuration of the document and media library or storage facilities, so that you see what kind of metadata you have, what kind of file types you have, what makes up an audio or a video component. And that's exactly what we have here. We can configure certain MIME types, for example, PNG, JPEG, and so on are typically considered as images. AVI is often considered as video. Actually, almost always docx is a text document, is a Word document. So all of these MIME types can be configured. And what does that mean? With different tools to calculate, to generate previews or thumbnails, we can actually refer to one tool for images, to another tool for documents, to yet another tool for videos. And also we can extract metadata like the infamous EXIF data from video, from images, from photos. This is metadata that is automatically extracted and stored within Liferay's database as metadata for a photo, if that's there. Here it says we can configure the MIME settings through system settings. We can also configure them through portal properties. Our upcoming exercise, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, will configure through the system settings. And, well, that's the preferable way. If we have both ways, you typically want to go through system settings. And you can see here the kind of MIME types that we can configure, the disposition inline settings. We can say, what do we consider images? And then we have the audio, image, and video MIME types. Personally, one feature that I kind of love because it brings me back to my ancient history, sometime in, well, before 2008, it's got to be that time, I've been actually involved with Sun Microsystems. Yes, we all remember that company name. Sun Microsystems bought a company named Star Division, which was located in Hamburg, where I still live. And we partnered with, I can't remember if it was Star Division or Sun Microsystems, but I think it was Sun already. And we've been partnering with them, with a previous company that I've worked for, in using StarOffice as a server-side tool for document conversion. So we've been partnering with them and actually worked on making it truly headless. And that was quite a nice experience to work with that team. Kudos to them if they happen to see this. And I was very happy to see OpenOffice, or now LibreOffice, to resurface with Liferay to see that this feature is actually still live and well used, because we can interface with LibreOffice to convert Word documents, presentations, PowerPoint presentations, open text documents into previews, into PDF and other formats. How does that work? Well, we gotta have some LibreOffice server running, and what we have prepared here is not yet another Docker image. I'm not quite sure if there is a pre-configured Docker image for you containing LibreOffice in server mode, but if you want to just try it out quickly, here are the parameters to start LibreOffice. The file name soffice still points at the old StarOffice. You'll open some port locally. You'll ask it to be truly headless, and then on the other side you configure Liferay to know that it's got to connect to localhost port 8100, and LibreOffice will be able to convert your documents. Quite a nice memory of the past. So I'm happy to see this in action. Bonus exercise, see if there is a LibreOffice Docker container, run that, but you see the basic functionality here, how to interface Liferay DXP with LibreOffice. For the document settings exercises, here are our goals. We'll create a new document MIME type. We'll export, deploy the configuration in a separate container. Well, remember, we have the Tomcat and we have the Wildfly container now, and we can actually migrate them from one to the other to use the user interface to generate our config file. Told you it's really hard to type them from scratch. Don't make a typo there. Well, rather take some system, configure it there, download the config file, and then you can deploy it to any other container, to any other system, to any other running system. And the exercise is well laid out in the written material, in the exercise instruction. You'll find the documents and media in system settings, create a new MIME type for some markdown files, export that, after that import or deploy to a new system, and our new system will be our Wildfly server. So we'll export from Tomcat, we'll import to Wildfly. Let me tell you one thing, spoiler alert, it's a trivial exercise, but it's well worth doing it once, because every other system setting works exactly the same way. bonus exercise is here, but you'll find that within the written material as well. Not all of the slides will be in the written material. There might be more bonus exercises in the written material. Just go with whatever you can.